Today's video is brought to you by Squirrel-space. What's up everyone? Lance Hedrick here, and today we have an exciting video. We're going to be taking a look at the Aram espresso maker, the Cafelat Robot, and the Flair 58. We're going to look at workflow, thermal management, what's best for light, medium, dark roasts, and just essentially any question you could ask about which one of these might suit you best. So in the end, there's not really going to be a singular winner because it's all up to use case, but I'm excited to get deep into these products because I think they're all wonderful options in the same price point. Now, before continuing, I would ask that you would take a moment and hit the like and subscribe if you have watched previous content and have enjoyed it. It would help a lot, and I know it's easy to forget to do those things. Of course, if you've never seen anything, welcome to the page. My name is Lance, and we do some weird coffee stuff here. Now, I have done a video on the Cafelat Robot and its predecessor, the one that inspired its design, which I'll link right here, and the link will be in the caption below if you're interested in looking at that and the historical inspiration that took place in the creating of this by Paul Pratt. I also have a couple of videos on the Flair 58, one with in-depth thermal testing that you can check out, which again will be linked there, but also in the caption at the end. This is the first time I've been doing the Aram, so I might take a little bit more time on this one than these two in this video, but overall, this will be a full comparison. Now, I do have time cues below for those of you that might want to see something more than the other or skip to the final comparison or whatever you want to do, but I have everything in one place with time cues so that you can have a one-stop type deal. And I'm not going to milk you for 1,000 videos. We're just going to get it all done right here, baby. Squirrel! God, that is so annoying. ADHD, am I right? Who feels me? Let me know down below. ADHD, it's crazy, but do you know what's even more crazy? A squirrel is spelled S-Q-U, which is also the first three letters of the word square. Squarespace is the ad. We just segued and your mind is blown. Squarespace is an awesome online tool that entrepreneurs can use and people like me who don't know how to work a computer, where I can go on, there's a template, I set it up, I got a presence online where people can come and have a discussion with me. I can sell them stuff. I can use my silver tongue in order to get ideas into your head and show you cool pictures of my luscious locks and videos of me singing and beatboxing. Gotta make it entertaining, right? So that we're sticking around together. But anyway, use the link below, which is www.squarespace.com/Lance Hedrick. You will receive 10% off your Squarespace subscription. Now, I actually used the 10% discount from James Hoffmann a few years ago when I started my first website, and it's still running today, lancehedrick.coffee. So I recommend, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are someone that has creative ideas, if you are someone that's been wanting to launch a business, but you've been, how do I get my online presence? I don't know how to code websites. Guess what? Squarespace has done it for you. So take a look. They have templates ready for you. They got the online e-commerce covered for you, and they have a little community for you so you can interact with peeps. It's very cool. It's very easy. It's very fun, and they support this channel. So check them out. Click the link below. It will help me. It'll help you. It'll help us all. And squirrel. Now, this is made in Brazil. It's been around for a few years now. The first Kickstarter came out 5 or so years ago, and maybe 6 years ago, actually. I believe it was 2017. And so what this one does is it is a piston-driven espresso maker using a threaded system. So as you screw back, you are lifting a piston inside of the chamber, all right? So it's heavily threaded, which means with these fine threads, as you go down, it doesn't take much force in order to create the necessary pressure. But it's the same idea as the robot and as the Flair, which we all know are using pistons to drive down the force of the water through the puck. Same as the Espresso Forge as well, which is not represented here, but I do have a video on it there. Same as like the Newton and some other brewers, all piston driven. But this one's taking a little bit of a unique approach to how it's getting that water to go through it. So as you come all the way up, it locks out, which means the piston is fully retracted. Now, there's a one-way valve inside the piston itself. So when the piston is all the way down at the very bottom, you pour the water in. Then as you pull up, it sucks the water below and is in the brew chamber ready to go through that coffee. It comes with this cup. You can buy the stand. You don't have to buy the stand. This can be completely portable. Let me unscrew this. You just screw a little thumb screw on the side, and once you take off this bottom basket, you are able to pull it out, and it's almost like it's a little hand grinder. All right, so it's fully portable, where you can make espresso on the go, like a little hand grinder. It also comes with this cup, which is supposed to connect right here. There's a little gasket inside. Now, I've noticed that sometimes it fits really tightly, but there are times like now where maybe it's because I've already preheated it, maybe it's a little wet, that it doesn't stick super well. But you can always just hold it like this as you're brewing your espresso and should be no issue. You got a little travel setup. Yada yada bing bang. I don't know what came out of my mouth just then, but we're sticking with it. And now with this, you have, you know, permanent home setup, essentially. They went against all odds. I mean, they had the power of the universe going against them, saying, you know, it's probably impossible to put something like a pressure gauge in this design. It's not gonna happen. You're not gonna do it. You're gonna be flying blindly forever. I saw someone say this. It was some like troll online with a lot of influence. Who's that like, that nerd that said that?
I do wish it had some sort of pressure gauge or the ability to be modified to have a pressure gauge, but the nature of this kind of a brewer means that you could never really have that in an easy or simple way. So you'll always be a little bit blind in that regard.
Well, it seems like it was Daddy Hoff. Well, that's awkward. Anyway, it seems that they have made a pressure gauge. Yeah, and it works really beautifully. We'll see that in a second. But essentially, it's a set of concentric rings, and as pressure builds, the innermost ring will go up to tell you it's at 2 bar. The second ring will go up when it's at 4 bar, and so on and so forth till 8 bar. Then at the end of 8, when it hits 9 bar, a sliver of red shows up telling you, yo, you're getting really high pressure, you need to kind of chill your roll, and then you can slowly go down. The bottom piece is very simple. It's a little screw piece that just holds a La Spaziale basket. So it's actually branded La Spaziale. You can take other baskets because that's a pretty common basket size. For instance, let's just take my Vostok, for instance. We have this meaty triple shot basket. So if you wanted a meaty, big, thick dose, guess what? Like a glove, as Ace Ventura would say. They say there's a one-handed trick. I've not like gotten it down. There we go. Just kind of like find the thread and you screw it in. It screws really nicely. It actually does not get very hot, this piece right here. So at the very end, you can take it out. Just make sure all the water is run through, otherwise the water will come over and get you. All right, it'll get you good. I'm not a huge fan of this funnel because the lips go straight into the basket, which cause a little disturbance of the bed. So if you see, they don't sit on the rim, they go inside. So there's that little dip right around the edges that you kind of need to fix whenever you're done WDTing or doing whatever you're doing. Comes with a nice little tamp, very simple, but it fits pretty nicely inside of the basket itself. Now, I do recommend using something like a puck screen on top of your puck of coffee, and that's because of a few things. One, the shower screen on this machine is a bit smaller in diameter than you would want, kind of like the original Flair 58 was before they removed the shower screen and replaced it with just using a puck screen. And so I think that can cause for a bit of a skewed extraction whenever you have that water coming out directly downwards, right in the center of the puck. It's kind of over-concentrating that initial wetting to the middle of the puck, which can just cause some skewed extraction. You see how it comes out like that? Now the diameter is only that big, right? But the diameter of the basket is that. Because the holes are so small, they get clogged really easily. You need something like an ultrasonic bath to really get them cleaned up. Preheating is a necessity since there's no active heating going on with it. And so some of them are easier than others to preheat. Right when you pour water in on a cold maker, that water dips to about 60 degrees Celsius, even with boiling water. It takes 2 pretty robust preheats in order to get it up to temperature before you put in your boiling water. And then you might be hitting 86, 87 degrees. A single preheat is probably fine, but then you'll be in the low 80s, which is fine for dark roasted coffees. Now, one way I've found that wastes a lot less water than doing 2 full preheats is just by putting the Aram on top of your kettle as it's heating and let it sit for 5-8 minutes. But essentially there's no real insulation inside. It's just kind of metal with that piston, which can suck a lot of heat because it's metal, and then you have this wood, which allows, you know, the heat to kind of dissipate. Click hold on your kettle so it can sit and just boil and hit that steam, then it's gonna get pretty toasty. I have found that if you let it sit for about 4 or 5 minutes and then you pour boiling water in, you're already at 86 or so degrees Celsius. Regardless, you're going to need to preheat. That first one, even after this, is still gonna read just below 80 degrees. So even with darker roasted coffees, you want more heat. So I would recommend still doing a preheat after steam heating it, and then going with 100 degree. Of course, you can still get passable espresso with one preheat or with just steam preheating. You can still get good espresso, but you're not gonna be able to push those extractions. You're not gonna be able to really pull lightly roasted coffees without getting a little bit of sourness. As you can see, there's a ring around the edge, which I don't love. I always feel this, need to kind of fix that. Now we're gonna tamp-a-rooski. There we go. I'm gonna just drop my little screen boop, right on top, and there we have it. I'm gonna go ahead and rid the water. We're gonna put the coffee in. We've got our water at boiling. We're gonna toss it in here. Gonna turn on the probe, and we're gonna see where we're at once I have this filled. 87. We're gonna open up this valve, pull up the piston, and now I like to go quickly down until I raise about 2 bar of pressure. There we are at 2. And we have some drips coming out. Now I'm gonna quickly raise to 8 bar. I'm gonna stay at 8. And now I'm just gonna slowly go down. Slowly descending pressure. I had about 18.5 grams in the basket. I'm now at 4 bar. Now at about 2.5-ish. And we're gonna hit 45 grams, and then I'm gonna pull up the piston to kind of vacuum it off. And then I'll get the rest of the water out. You have clearance for a scale, a cup, all that good stuff, and you can really pay attention to what's going on. Of course, there's no way to hook up a smart profiler like I have on the robot and the Flair 58, so you can't do it via Bluetooth, but it's a really nice way in order to track what you're doing. You can write down your profile, and the next day you can replicate it. This way of measuring pressure is just beautiful. I love watching the little concentric circles kind of pop up, pop up, pop up. Now, if we go right back and do another shot, I haven't pulled out the puck yet, but if we put more water in at boil and we check what that temperature is without a preheat, but just relying on that last one, we're back up to we're at about 85. So what I have noticed is because the shot takes some time and that piston's going down, up here where there's no water, I'm assuming it's dissipating heat more and more quickly than down here. And so in between shots, you actually might need another preheat, which is a downside if you're doing lightly roasted coffees. So again, I think potentially in the future, I think a big help would be having some layer of insulation inside, something like how the Flair has that insulative sleeve, something that will hold heat, trap heat instead of letting it dissipate. As you pull shots, this you can tell gets pretty hot, which is showing that a lot of it is kind of dissipating out. While it's constructed beautifully well, if you're trying to show off to you're trying to impress someone, you can just sit there and check this out. Yeah, I'm at 9 bar. No, it's not an issue. Yeah, I know that other person you were telling me about has this other machine and they look goofy when they're pushing down. Do I look goofy? No, and I'm giving you legit espresso. It is not ideal for that thermal management. You're gonna get quickly dropping temperatures, and in between shots, you're gonna have to really, really heat that bad boy back up, which can cause a lot of water waste, and is just a kind of a pain to really mess around with. I've read that some people claim they can get up to 90. I think that would be maybe pushing it. I have not been able to achieve that. So if you're someone that drinks only really lightly roasted coffees like Nordic style, this is not gonna be the best bet for you unless they add some sort of insulation in the future. Next up, we have the legendary Cafelat Robot. There was a predecessor to this called the Faemina Baby, which was made back in the 60s. This was a modernized version of that machine, and it is built like a tank. Do not let the size deceive you. It can create espressos that rival that of machines much, much, much bigger, much more expensive. It is very simple with parts that are very easy to disassemble and clean. It's just a very simple, very effective unit. If you have a thermoprobe at home, the temperature that you get whenever you measure the water inside this basket is the highest temperature you can possibly get. I didn't talk much about heating the piston in my previous video, which I definitely should have, but I didn't. So we'll talk about it today. The piston can act as a pretty intense heat sink. In fact, if you trace your temperature throughout a shot, you're actually gonna get a much quicker dip in temperature when you don't have a preheated piston than if you do, and it's because it will suck a lot of that heat. Now, there's someone on Discord in the Espresso Aficionado forum that goes by Churls who created what's called the Thundies, and this is a 3D printed piece that covers the piston You put boiling water in it, goes up, locks in like it's a portafilter, and it preheats that piston with boiling water. Then you can let it sit for a while and you're good to go. I have one. I misplaced it right before filming this. How silly of me. There are alternative ways, however, to preheat that piston. One way I like is taking a Breville dual boiler little blank disc that's this little silicone piece, and you just shove it into the bottom of your basket. And if you shove it down far enough, it'll be seated really nicely in the bottom and will disallow water to go through. You want to preheat this first because it's going to suck all the heat from the water. We pour it in, no water gets through. I just kind of push it up onto the piston, which it doesn't really want to go because there's that air gap, right? And then you kind of lift it just enough to get it into the grooves, and you lock it in. There we go. So if you lift the piston up all the way and then put it up in there, you'll have a bigger air gap, and I don't want that when I'm preheating the piston. Thundies allows you to go over the piston while it's fully down, so you're probably getting a more efficient heating up of the piston, but this is a great way where you don't have to get the little 3D print, you don't have to worry about plastic or whatever, you just put a blind down in the bottom of that. Now, if you also don't want to buy one of those silicone pieces from Breville to kind of shove in there, you could also get just like a milk pitcher. Hey-o. Gonna fill it up, and you just go up on it like so. Boom. And then you're preheating it. Now the idea is you're trying to get that up to like 60 Celsius or so, that piston, in order to delay the losing of temperature. So it's not going to increase the top temperature you can get from pouring water into your basket, but it is going to lose temperature much, much, much more slowly. Now, of course, as you can imagine, as you're pulling successive shots, this is less of a worry because the piston's already very hot. It's just that first shot, you really want to preheat the mess out of that piston in order to get a reliable shot. That way, when you pull a second shot, it's very similar. That's actually really hot. I would not want to keep my hand on it. Now you would be ready to, pull your shot. What has been praised about the robot is that you don't really need preheating for most roast levels unless you're doing lighter roasted coffees. But with light coffees, you definitely want that preheat. Now, to kind of show that you don't really need a heat up, I just ran this under cool water to get it back to just like a normal temperature. So it's like room temp. You walk up to it, and you're just gonna pour boiling water in. I've kept the silicone thing in there so that we don't have to worry about coffee. Of course, coffee will take some of the temperature out. So I'm gonna take water at boiling, and I'm gonna pour it in with a cold basket, so it's gonna suck some of the heat, and we'll see just exactly what a no preheat temperature is gonna look like. And we're at 90.3. And then of course, when you lock it in, the piston's gonna pull out more. So like for instance, let's just put this water in. Now there is an air gap here, so the piston's probably not making contact with the water, but it is still gonna be sucking up because it is a mass, and it's gonna be sucking temperature upwards. And we're already at 80. Put it in there, it dropped temperature like 8 degrees. And yes, we had time that was elapsed, but it drops temperature pretty readily. And that was with a somewhat warm piston. So you really need to make sure that piston's really hot if you're wanting to do really lightly roasted coffees. If you put this on top of your kettle as it's heating up, and then you just use boiling water, that's more than enough. So here's the basket. We're gonna dump in our coffee. WDT, we're gonna tamp it down. Boom, drop the screen on top. And with that preheated basket, we are hitting a temperature of right at 90, even with a preheat. You can probably get higher if we preheat even longer. Of course, I could track this shot on my Smart Espresso Profiler because I have the Bluetooth pill set up to it. But we're just gonna pull a shot. I started at 3 bar, I ramped up to 9 bar, now I'm down to 6, and I'm just gonna kind of sit here for a bit. Let it slowly descend. Just letting the weight of my arms now kind of dictate the pressure. And there we go. We're gonna lift up. Really preheat that piston. You can get up to about 93, maybe even 94 if you preheat it enough. Really make sure that basket is super hot so it's not immediately losing temperature to the environment. Community around this machine is wildin'. There are some wild people out there who have their robots and are figuring out some really intriguing ways of doing things. Of course, we have the Thundies that I mentioned, but you have people that are taking PVC pipe. They found that it fits over that piston perfectly to do some weird things on preheating. I've read that people will put active heaters inside of the piston, like active heaters where they have it connected. It's like a 12 volt, 9 amp heater inside of it to actively heat the piston, which is mind blowing. People doing insulative wraps and all these different different things that have been going on because people love this machine. They love the basket that's in it and the texture it creates in the cup, and they want to optimize it for however they're drinking their coffees, whether it's a Neapolitan roast or whether it's a super light Nordic style roast. On the back, I have a tea splitter from Smart Espresso Profiler, and I have his naked gauge on top and the Bluetooth transducer pill on the bottom. So this connects to an app on my phone and I can trace the pressure curves through that. I have the same T-splitter on my Flair 58, which we'll see in a second, and the same naked gauge. The robot does come with its own pressure gauge. It's this cutesy little tiny one, but it fits on one of the arms, which I'm not a big fan of. So as you're going up, it fits onto this little guy so it can move around with it. So as you go up and you go back down, you are paying attention to the pressure gauge on the arm, which I just was not a huge fan of. So I opted for this one from Gabor out in Hungary, and have never looked back. I think it's slick, it fits to the back, so it's not, I mean, if that was face front, that would be ugly. But when you're looking at it like this, you don't really see anything, and you get your, the original aesthetics. And so as it's sitting on the bar, you don't really see anything, and it's really pretty. It's really nice. The basket, Paul Pratt designed specifically for a wide variety of shots. There is a taper on this basket. It's not quite 58 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and show you the basket. As you can see, there's a pretty intense taper here at the bottom, which he did purposely. I read a thread by him on Home Barista where he was talking about, he finds that this pulls more forgiving shots across the spectrum of roast profiles than something like a non-tapered wall. So it does a better job at giving body, it does a better job at just varying a lot of different spaces. And so he's very particular on the depth, on the width, on everything dealing with this portafilter. Any amount of water you can fit into this, it can do. Roughly know you have 70 to 90 depending on your dose. He tested it down to 10 gram doses, and I believe up to 22 or 24 gram doses. So it's very versatile. It can take on all of those and still hit high pressure at the 10 gram dose due to the amount of taper in that. I've tried seeing if other diameters work. 58 millimeter tampers do not work with this. So it's not a true 58 as far as how other 58s are measured, but it is a similar diameter to that. So you can get similar style shots to other machines like the Flair 58. It's just gonna be a little different. Kind of like in the Aram, which I forgot to mention, I would recommend filling up over the holes on the top of the Aram because you wanna make sure there's no air between the piston and the water. Same thing with this. I like to fill up to about that centimeter. In fact, you could make a little etch mark or something to ensure you're at the same level every time to where that piston's going to be hitting, so that you are not getting a big air gap in between that and the water. You can always stop your shot early and just dump the water at the end. You don't need to go through all of the water. As you saw with mine, this is all the leftover water when I was done with my shot. Base is really small and narrow because of these two arms. You do have the Waikeko scale that will fit. The Lunar will fit if you angle it like so, and then you put your cup like this. It's not a big deal. Obviously, the Kaya Pixis will fit. You can fit a decent amount of scales if you angle it like this. It's not the prettiest thing, but it's effective. This is a $20 scale, so it works for me. And yeah, I think we'll move on to the Flair 58. This one is the Plus Edition, which is a little more expensive because some of the accents, some of the little, doodads and whatnot that come with it, cutesy stuff. But essentially what you see is what you get. Opted to not include the actively heating bit so that it's a bit cheaper, but also I don't really like the actively heating bit. It adds electronics to the situation. I don't want to deal with electronics. The only electronic I want to deal with is the kettle. In fact, I did a lot of testing on the thermal stability and the thermal just dynamics of this machine in the video I linked earlier, which again is in the caption below, where I did just a ton of SCASE measurements on this under different scenarios. And so this is by far the best thermally stable of these three machines up here, and of any machine that I've found, any manual machine that I've found. It has this thick, robust kind of rubber insulation right here that's very effective. It's got thick stainless steel inside, which once heated up fully, maintains its heat pretty well because, it takes a bit to heat it. Once it's heated, it kind of maintains because of this wrapping. Of course, if you have the actively heating, it's going to help a little further, but I just don't think it's necessary. And in fact, when that element is on, I see an uptick in temperature near the end, whereas without it, you get nice little descends at the end. You get a little descending temperature profile, which is very popular and is more reminiscent of lever machines of antiquity. The original pressure gauge is this, which screws in right here. Took it out, put a T-splitter in, and I have the Bluetooth pill and the naked gauge from Smart Espresso Profiler. This allows me to track my different profiles and really be granular with how I'm pulling shots. And with a Bluetooth scale, I am able to track the gram per second output, as well as just the weight navigate in general to really be really consistent with my shots. So if you look under here, you'll just see the piston that's coming down. They rely on their mesh screen in order to distribute the water. I recommend getting an ultrasonic cleaner to make sure this stays as clean as possible. You don't want bits kind of stuck inside of this mesh, so make sure you're cleaning it. Just tossing Cafelat is not adequate enough. Just throwing it under a steam wand is not adequate enough. The best way I found to clean these outside of an ultrasonic is tossing it in a milk pitcher with Cafelat and water and steaming it, like you steam milk kind of. And that gets a lot of the gunk that just washing it in Cafelat won't get out. It has a pretty big chamber here, and once it's preheated, it gives you a lot of that thermal stability without having to faff around too much. There's a hook here they changed recently, in the past year or two, where now it kind of clips on both sides so that it kind of stays and you go down and up and down and up in order to like make the workflow a bit easier than the hook that would keep coming off. There is a hole, and in order for another metal piece to go and kind of cross over to the other side to hold it in place so it can't be disconnected. I actually like to have this off. And the reason is because when I want to preheat, you just take the piston out, very simply, and then you can just twist and pull out the group head itself. Because this is so much metal, it takes a lot to preheat. So you put that first one in, it's not adequate. It sucks all the heat out. But you know what does do a really nice job? Our trusty little kettle. You put it on top, you close the lid, you put it on boiling and back again. It's gonna get real hot. Oh, it's gonna get real hot. Of course, the temperature of the basket's gonna be affecting that, so we need to preheat that a bit as well, and maybe heat the piston a bit because this has some mass to it as well. Then, yeah, you should have really nice thermal stability there. I don't know what the steam, just heating it up like this, is gonna do over time to the gaskets. I can't speak to that. I imagine it's not gonna do anything because gaskets experience extremely high temperatures all the time, commercial machines and elsewhere, so I imagine it's completely fine, but just thought I would say that because all these I'm putting over a steaming hot kettle. Heating it all up, baby. In order to make sure that piston is nice and preheated, because it is a hunk of steel, I put that Breville blank inside, and I'm going to fill up, and you could just use a blank portafilter anyway, but I want to heat up the basket while I'm doing this. I'm gonna pour it while that piston is exposed. I'm not gonna lift it. I want everything in there to get as hot as possible because that's all metal, and it's gonna suck temperature away from our water, and it's at 85 degrees. So I'm gonna let that warm up for a bit, then we'll flush that out. Dose out my coffee while we're at temperature. Stir around, little tappy tap. Drop our screen on, boom. There we go. This isn't going to be the most perfect representation. We're at 88 because that piston's still gonna be drawing it. If I were to have poured and pulled, it would have retained the temperature a bit better. But anyway, we have it all pulled up. Let's put some actual pressure on. We're at 3 bar. We're gonna raise up to 9. Grind's a little fine, but that's no worries. We're just gonna sit at 9 for a bit. A little fine, but it's gonna be a chunky little shot, isn't it? You're a chunky little shot. All right, now we're gonna start cascading the pressure as the resistance is fading, and we're down to 7 bar, 6 bar. We have our shot. Really intense fruits there. That's more of a ristretto style shot. The way I like using that electric one is I like to turn it on, let it get to full temp, then I turn it off as I'm prepping my puck, and then continue on with it so that it's not going to do that uptick due to the actively heating group head. It's a very simplistic machine. It just has this nice curve about it with really good leverage with how long the lever is. Of course, it does get really tall when it's pulled all the way up, so you need to take that into account wherever you're storing it. Make sure you have enough headspace to really be able to lift it all the way up. So it is kind of long front to back. It's a pretty big machine, and that portafilter comes over though. You can kind of change the orientation of the group a little bit in order to change that. But in the end, it's a well constructed machine that is at a pretty good price point considering what all you're getting with it. And I think the big advantage this has to the other two is its 58 millimeter portafilter. You can act like you're a barista. You can feel like a barista on a normal espresso machine. With this, you can get the accessories that come with it, and you can play around with the different basket designs that are coming out. Of course, you're still limited on the amount of water you can use, but all of these are limited on that, and that's just kind of part of using a lever machine unless you go with the Uniterra Nomad, which I've made a video on it. It's really fun. with workflow, like going back to back to back shots, first place, second place, and this is definitely third place. This is not one you're going to pull a ton of back to back shots with due to the amount of preheating that's needed with it. The Aram is the easiest as far as the effort put in is minimal. You can sit there and anybody, regardless, can hit that 9 bar. I know, like, I've had my wife try to do these and she cannot get to that 9 bar. It's just, she's short and on this high table, it's really hard for her to get enough pressure. With this, it's very simple. You're just churning butter. You're just churning butter. That's all you're doing. It's not a big deal. And it's actually much easier than you think to control the pressure. If you just slow down the turn, you see the motion in real-time feedback of these little concentric rings telling you where you're at. So if you're going at a constant rate and you're maintaining a pressure, you slow down a bit and the pressure will decrease. So I mean, it's the same thing as this. You're just using these horizontal turns in order to control it. As far as control though, between these, the robot I find much easier because you're using 2 hands in order to really control that pressure. If you have a pressure profile and you're using the Smart Espresso Profiler app and you're trying to hit the curve exactly, and I would choose this in order to replicate identically what you're trying to do. This one with that arm, you are kind of relying on one arm as opposed to 2, which is like this. This incorporates more muscle, more control, more stability. This one you can still do a great job, don't get me wrong. It's just out of the 2, if we're talking about which one is easier, this one is a bit easier because you're taking into account both arms. Now I think technically less energy is needed to pull this lever down as far as the whole system. But using one arm versus using 2, it's kind of different. I would say this probably takes more energy to push down than this one, but because it's broken into 2, it gives you a bit more control. For me, it definitely comes down between these 2 as far as which one is the prettiest. I think this, it might win my heart because it is so entrenched in history, but this one is so elegant and so just pleasing to the eye on its stand. It's just a hefty piece of, I don't know, it's gorgeous. I had my friend Rui over, who's the recent Portuguese barista champion, and he was just head over heels about this, how you use it, how it looks, and he was like, if I were to dream of having a vacation home, that's what would sit there, kind of thing. And so it's just a really nice piece of art that kind of sits there. But again, I think the robot's beautiful as well, but they're definitely 2 completely different aesthetics overall. Which one is easiest to get a great shot on? Without question, would be the robot. Now, this one, because of its tapered basket, because of the way it's constructed, it is much easier to get a brand new machine and immediately start pulling like decent espressos, relatively speaking. Because the amount of faff that goes into preheating this is kind of difficult if you're using anything but really dark roasted coffees, that makes the learning curve a little difficult because people don't think they need to preheat it that much. With this one, because the way it works, you need a really fine grind, and sometimes I've seen people have to buy new grinders just to go fine enough to be able to hit it with this. With this one, you're able to do a wide range of doses, and you're able to pretty easily get to the pressure you're wanting and the flavor you're wanting. Yes, there's still a learning curve as with all manual espresso machines, but this one is by far the easiest, where you can just take one, you grind some coffee, put it in, and you can likely get a decent tasting shot out of it because it has that pressure gauge, and the preheating isn't nearly as important as it is with these 2. It's really about heating up that basket really, really well because it's actually thicker than normal baskets, it feels like, and heating up that piston. Once you do that, you're essentially there. Nominally, you'll get some differences when you have this scorching hot, but in the end, preheating this is much more of a breeze than either of these 2, especially if you're one of those crazy home baristas, adding in active heating cartridges inside of it, or pads is what I was seeing people adding. Now, of course, they all come with their own tamp. The Flair with this nice little palm tamp. They also have a little plug type tamp that they come with, which this is a little small for the basket I found. The other one I found to be, it seemed a little better. Maybe that's just poor memory, but this one's just a piece of steel. It does the job fine. And then, of course, this one is essentially a piece of steel, but it has kind of like a plasticky handle on it. If you're someone that drinks just occasional light, but mostly medium dark, then you could get this and maybe just don't drink espresso from it, or just those occasional times really preheat the mess out of it by putting it on the kettle, doing 2 preheats, whatever it might be. But for the most part, this is not for really light roasted coffee drinkers. The Flair and the Robot can do any roast style. The Flair has a higher thermal capacity than the Robot does, but the Robot does do light roasts well. There's been this idea that you need 95 degree or whatever to do light roast well. No, 90 degree does fine with most coffees. Maybe you need a little bit more temperature, but how about instead we just do a little bigger ratio or something? The Flair does all the way around quite nicely. If you're doing just darker roasted coffees though, I honestly would not get a Flair, and that's because the experience using the Aram I just prefer so much, and the Robot, honestly. If all I do is light roasted coffees, I would consider getting a Flair, or if I really wanted to just play with 58 millimeter accessories, the Flair. The compactness of the Robot and the structure of it and the community built around it from the years it's been out, there is a nice community around these as well, but there just seems to be a lot more engineers, I would say, that are in the community for this, with a lot of really cool ideas on how to improve, which it doesn't need much improvements, but to improve what is already here. I am obsessed with the pressure indicator. I think those concentric rings were brilliant, and the fact that they were able to find a solution that is retrofittable, mind you, if you have older Arams, this one will fit it, I think is a brilliant addition and makes this a very valid competitor on the market. They just really need to work on their insulation. If I've missed something, please make sure to ask me down below in the comments. Let me know if you finished the video as well, because it always warms my heart when people finish my long rant videos, because I put a lot of time and work into these, and I want to make sure that you're, enjoying it. Also, I'd love if you checked out my Patreon. I give things away there. I'll be giving, these away as well. Maybe not the Robot, because this is something I won in a competition, but I'll definitely be giving the Flair and the Aram away. I have a secondary YouTube I just started called Lance Hedrick Unfiltered, where I stream to my Patreon community and then I upload it there later, but they can engage during the live stream. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we're working on over here at the Lance and Ugo Studios. So that's about it. Thank you. Love you. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring, and hope you brew something tasty. Cheers.